Hey, Nerd Herd, Dynasty Nerds here, back again this week talking good wide receiver buys. It's always a good opportunity to get a young wide receiver or even older wide receiver that give you high-end production.
I love those good vibrations.
I got a guy that's he's been a good buy forever, and people still won't buy him.
Silly sometimes.
Take our advice, people.
Check out who that player is on this week's episode.
Ready, set, hut, hut. Welcome to the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss Dynasty strategy, rankings, and all things NFL. So get ready to geek out on fantasy football with your host, Rich Dotson.
And welcome to the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast with your host, Camden Dotson.
Whoa, wait a minute.
Hey.
I am not ready to be replaced quite yet, especially by an 8-year-old.
Hey, I'm buying Cam. I'm selling Rich.
Yep.
All right, well, you know, hey.
Out with the old, in with the new.
Hey, if you want some weak Dynasty takes, ask an 8-year-old. That's what I'm saying. And I'm Rich Dotson, here with my fellow nerds, Matt O'Hara.
Hey.
And Garret Price.
I thought I was going to be Jerry. I really did.
So
I was
did
waiting for it.
I definitely did.
No. I would never do that to you.
Today's pussyfoot.
So
Shut up, Jared.
You know, we had,
You don't get an intro, all right?
I just want to be involved.
Well, we gave Jared a chance. We gave Camden Dotson a chance. And, you know, Cam could potentially be a future Dynasty Nerds contributor for sure.
He's a 2020 or 2032 first-round pick.
Sure.
The kid loves Dynasty. He loves football, but he's got a long way to go. I'm thinking I'm going to give him his first Dynasty League this year.
Ooh.
Maybe I'll have some listeners. They got to get involved with their kids and make their kids, like, it's got to be an equal opportunity. That'd be fun, like a Dynasty Nerds kids.
I'll put
listener league.
I'll put Amelia in. 6-year-old genius.
That'd be fun.
She's
But
killing
no.
T-ball right now. That's all I'm saying.
I mean,
But we're not here to talk about our children. We're here to talk about Dynasty fantasy football wide receivers that we think we could buy. And that's what today's show is going to be based off of. But before we get into even that, let's have a word from one of my favorite sponsors, and that's our friends at Manscaped. Manscaped is coming out with a new product. They just had a new product come out. I have it. You guys have
I
it.
have it.
The Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0. And I can't wait to tell you how to get 20% off and free shipping with the promo code NERDS at manscaped.com. Now, listen, I love Manscaped because what is the point of scrubbing your midsection vigorously and then nobody can smell the fruits of your labor, right? What's the point? This isn't bowling. We don't need bumpers, right? We don't need some soft landing for somebody's head to be comfortable. No, we're trying to look good, feel good,
sleek, you know?
right? You know, us people out there, especially as dads, we need a little bit more attention, right? Because we're dads.
It's true.
We work hard. We
Father's
do
Day's
that.
coming up.
We let our kids get on podcasts and do some talking, but we need to be rewarded. And the best way to get rewarded is to look good. Look good, feel good.
Feel good, play good.
That's why I feel great.
Feel
So,
good. Play good.
right now at manscaped.com, like we mentioned, Father's Day is right around the corner, right? So this is an opportunity to get your dad the best gift in all he really wants, and that's just a little bit more attention from either.
Stop peeking
somebody else
at
a
me.
little more.
I wasn't ready the first time. I'm not ready this time, Matt.
I mean, dude, the new 4.0 it's way more sleek than the 3.0. It's
That's
very
true.
nice looking. And what's a better way than surprising your dad with this sleek, well-designed, optimized body hair trimmer that says, listen, your balls will thank you on the box. I mean, it's terrific. The 4th generation trimmer comes with a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to the advanced skin-safe technology. And you're like, hey, what is different about the 4.0 than these other Manscaped models or trimmers out there? Well, as a 4000K LED spotlight, so you can see very well. It charges really well.
It's bright. Yep.
It has the new settings, sizes 1 through 4. The battery lasts longer. All the things that the 3.0 did, the 4.0 does even better. And they have other products there as well. I mean, maybe your dad has long nose hairs. They have the Weed Whacker.
Get the weed whacker.
Whack them up. They're right there. He's going to help you out. It's waterproof. You take it in the shower. They have the crop preserver lotion for the two little studs down under. It's fantastic. It smells good. And right now, again, like I said, you get 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com with the promo code NERDS. Don't forget that you came from your dad's balls. This year, show your original home some love with Manscaped.
Did you add that or was that them?
Oh, that's so good. It's them. I wish I could take.
You wish you could take credit for that one, huh?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about scrubbing vigorously, then that's all me. But where you came home, it's like ET. Get back there.
Phone home.
You're calling your dad's balls?
That's exactly what I thought. Why are you calling us balls?
Why not? Hey, no place like home. And let's get into these running backs or wide receivers that we're talking about.
This is
buying.
completely off
This is
the
the
rails.
best show we've ever done.
Manscaped.
The number of things we've cut out of this show, you guys will never know.
We don't ever edit the show. We just started the show. We've cut
3 times?
3 times.
Yeah.
Well, Manscaped was made to advertise in Dynasty.
That's true.
And the best part is we all use it
Yep.
and love it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's great. That's why you got to use the promo code NERDS, because I promise you will love it. There's a lot of ladies that listen. You would love it if you give it to your man. Or significant other. You don't have to be a man to use Manscaped, right?
I wouldn't think so.
I would
No.
still
I think
use it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think trimmers work
For
anywhere.
everyone.
Yeah, you got-
Anyway, let's talk about wide receivers.
Anywhere.
First wide receiver up. A guy who I'm buying. Now, it's funny because we had like a hard time selling. There's a ton of wide receivers I could put on this list to buy. I had to come up with 2. So my first one is Paris Campbell, wide receiver, Indianapolis Colts. Now, this was a guy who was hurt a lot his rookie year. He played in only 7 games, hurt his MCL in week 2 of last year, where here played in 7 games. I'm all off the rails, Manscaped. He played in 7 games last year. Last year, or his rookie year. Last year, he hurt his MCL in week 2 real early, so he barely played in the game. He only played week 1. And in that week 1, he looked really good. He had 6 receptions, 71 yards, and looked really good. Comes out and gets hurt. So he's been injury prone. It's been weird. His MCL, his hand. He's all been these different kind of injuries. So he has an injury prone status, which means he's affordable. He can go out there and buy. And this was a guy that I've been big on since coming out. We gave him first round grade coming out his rookie year.
Definitely.
Fantastic hands, 4.3 speed. He complements Michael Pittman really good. And you had Carson Wentz as one of your buys going forward. So to me, if Carson Wentz is going to do good, the receivers around him are going to have to do as well. And listen, Michael Pittman could have easily been on this list. But Michael Pittman to me doesn't fall into something you can buy. Like, I don't think the price range is there. If you have Michael Pittman, you're not.
We do talk about him in our sophomore step-ups, though. We're a fan of him. We do think he'll get better. He's just difficult to buy right now.
You'd have to overpay for Michael Pittman. I'm not comfortable doing that quite.
Sure.
Yeah, so I love Pittman a ton, but Paris Campbell is the buy for me right now. And this is a list, right, for me that where I like about Paris Campbell is they brought back T.Y. Hilton. So they have T.Y. Hilton on the outside. Michael Pittman's probably going to play in X where he is, and they're probably going to move Paris Campbell back to the slot role. Last year, that role was occupied by Zach Pascal, who played 66% of his snaps from the slot, which was 7th most in the NFL. So they utilized the slot a lot there, Frank Wright in Indy. And it just so happens Paris Campbell, coming out his senior year, ran a majority, if not all, his routes from the slot, and he was number 1 in college football his senior year in yards per route from the slot. So he lived there. Quick off those lines, those quick slants from Paris Campbell, he capitalized on those a ton, and his sure hands always brought it in. So an offense that I think is going to take a significant step forward here, the offensive line, Carson Wentz, Jonathan Taylor in year 2, and now with Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, and T.Y. Hilton, I think this is a really good offensive step up to offer some fancy production out of Paris Campbell, who I believe could be a very solid wide receiver 3. So I'm not saying buy this Paris Campbell for this huge upside here, which I'm not saying he can't get there, but right now I envision him going in 2021 as a solid wide receiver 3, and you could probably buy him at wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 price ranges, right? Late second round picks. Because right around we get that second round, like even in super flex leagues, mid second round, it starts to dwindle a little bit right there from a talent level. And that's where I like to get in on a guy like Paris Campbell. So I have no problem giving up the late second round pick for a guy like Paris Campbell who offers that upside, because I don't think any of his injuries right now are to the point where I'm concerned about him being hurt long term, since they've all been different and somewhat of freak injuries, even MCL.
So yeah, right now he's he's coming off the board as wide receiver 71 as far as ADP. So yeah, he definitely, I think he's got a huge potential to outstrip that, just based off the fact that the pedigree, draft pedigree that he has, and the fact that he's been injured the first 2 years. And now that Frank Reich's finally got a quarterback, I think that he feels comfortable with in there, and as long as he stays healthy, he's sure to outperform wide receiver 71 numbers. So right now you're not giving up. It's like 14th, 15th round or something. I think he's picked 170 like overall in ADP. So he's very cheap. He can definitely be had.
Second round's I'm probably overshooting.
I think you're overshooting there. Yeah, I think at this point, having 2 years where he's been injured and not really performed, I think it's brought back his value where he was, a late first to early second in his rookie year. Maybe you can get him late second, early third round draft pick nowadays with a frustrated owner that just wants to get something in return for somebody who he's seen nothing from or her. He or she has seen nothing from. So Campbell's a nice little buy, in my opinion, right now, just because he's got huge upside.
I like Campbell overall. I think you guys have always been higher on Campbell than I have. I remember talking about it on the show. I think he's a good athlete. I'm not sure that he's a great receiver, and I think he falls into the category of a guy that I think will be very good for the Colts, and I think will help the Colts. I'm worried about how consistently he'll be targeted and where on the field he'll be targeted, because I think you could easily fall into one of those like lower A-dot roles, a lot of stuff closer to the line of scrimmage. Now he has the speed to take one of those to the house.
I think that's his game. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, he could easily do that at times, but is he going to do it enough for me to feel comfortable starting him anytime soon? I don't know, but you guys are both absolutely right. At the current cost, I'm willing to take that risk to find out, because you're not paying a lot for it. And it is a guy that, we did have high hopes for at one point.
Yeah, falls in the category of former first-round picks that I'm not completely out from, that here we are a couple of years later due to injury, hasn't really produced. And I mentioned, even like week 1 last year, like everybody got real excited. 6 catches, 71 yards, 13.1 points in PPR leagues. You're like, all right, it's Paris Campbell, breakout season. Sure. Here we go. And then immediately, MCL, gone, lost. So players like that, when it's due to injury like that, it's not because they've just been dropping footballs or sucking it up. Those always open great buying windows for me. And again, I'm not coming out here preaching wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1. I think he's going to be a nice wide receiver 3 in 2021 if he stays healthy, and that's where I'm trying to get the value at. So, Matt, give us a guy to buy.
All right, so my first buy is Cortland Sutton, wide receiver of the Broncos. Right now he's coming off as a wide receiver 34 off the board, which to me is it's a little bit surprising. Obviously last year played in 1 game and then tore his ACL. So, we didn't see a huge sampling from him in 2020. But going back to 2019, that was his second year in the league, and he finished as wide receiver 19 overall in just his second season there in Denver. And it wasn't like he had a great quarterback situation. It was Drew Lock's rookie season there when he put up those numbers. So it was, obviously 2020 was something where I was expecting big things. I think a lot of people were expecting big things from Cortland Sutton. And the torn ACL, it happens. It's unfortunate when these kind of things happen, especially on a year when you're expecting big numbers out of somebody. But to have him go from wide receiver 19 in 2019, I'm guessing his ADP was probably even higher than that at points in 2019, to dropping all the way back to wide receiver 34. I think it offers huge value. In 2019, he had the 11th highest yards per route at 2.48 yards per route, and the 15th highest yards per reception at over 15 yards per catch. And that was actually a downgrade from his rookie season where he had 16.8 yards per reception. So, Denver's a club that throws the ball an awful lot. Last year, they attempted 556 pass attempts, and I could definitely see that being around the same mark. And obviously, the big entrance into the Denver passing game has been Jerry Jeudy. And last year, Jerry Jeudy, he had 113 targets, so it was quite a lot. But you saw a lot of guys like, KJ Hamler had 60 or so, and then it was Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick
had a solid
had a large target share there as well. So you expect a guy like Tim Patrick to fall by the wayside, I think, in a year. Sure. In a year where Cortland Sutton comes back, but that 556 targets or attempts last year leaves a plenty, I think, as far as targets for Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Fant, Hamler, the running backs, Gordon and Jay Will, it leaves a lot of meat on the bones. So, I could definitely see Courtland Sutton getting back to that 125 target range, which was what he was at in 2019 when he was ascending and becoming the 19th best, dynasty wide receiver. I could easily see him getting back to those kind of numbers in 2021 now that he's healthy.
And he got hurt so early that he'll be easily 100% going into the week 1 of the season. Like, there's no I need to work my way back in.
Yeah, if it was week 15, we'd be a little more concerned.
Yeah.
And he's the typical, 6'4", 216-pound X receiver, and it's somebody that I think him and Drew Lock have a pretty decent connection. If it's Drew Lock, passing the ball. I think
we believe it will be.
I believe it will be. I think Teddy's a fallback plan in case he completely flops. But they have a nice rapport going, so I do think that he'll be able to get back to those numbers and probably even excel and get past the numbers that he put up in 2019.
Yeah. And what I like about Sutton is I love players that come into the league with pedigree, right, and then produce early on. Those are where you find your superstars, right? Guys that come in that we all knew. Courtland Sutton coming on SMU was actually valued the year before higher than he was before when he came out into that draft because he had his last year in college a little bit worse of production there, so he dropped a little bit. But he always had that pedigree as like the wide receiver 1 when he comes out, goes into Denver, starts to look good really early on and produce at a high level. And we did a whole show where we talked about Courtland Sutton, what to give up for Courtland Sutton at the time, and we're like, hey, I'd give up a pretty significant value of him as being a future wide receiver 1 for the long term. Now you insert a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who again falls in that really savvy route runner, good speed. Him and where Courtland Sutton's that typical X receiver. It's a really good combo to have for any quarterback at hand. And we know in this day NFL they both can produce at a high level.
So I like that point, but even if they get to the point where they are kind of cannibalizing each other, a return to his wide receiver 2 status is still great value considering he's going as wide receiver 34 right now. So
and that's where I envision Courtland Sutton to live if he comes back as a solid player, like around that wide receiver 15 mold, kind of living that Robert Woods territory, anywhere between wide receiver 13 and 15 consistently, which is extremely valuable.
Exactly.
But again, if you get that and you get paying 34 value, that's tremendous. Where most people are going to want that Jerry Jeudy share. So again, we talked about Jerry Jeudy, at least I did on the show as well. Like I expect Jerry Jeudy to have a very solid sophomore step up. So him and Courtland Sutton both involved. I think Courtland Sutton's a great buy right now. And if he's going at 34, then I'm willing to pay over for what his ADP tells me what he is.
I do like Courtland Sutton as well. There is going to likely be an odd man out there. We talked about it on our sells before, and I had Noah Fant as a sell. I think Fant will likely be the one that disappoints of the 3. Mm-hmm. But there is that risk there. But I think you're absolutely right. Where he's being taken right now, there's a very strong likelihood of him being able to return to that value. And Drew Lock is no superstar. Maybe he turns it around this year and becomes their long-term quarterback. If so, then that's great for Courtland Sutton. If not, that means they're going to be drafting a guy next year. They just can't continue on with this if he isn't the guy. So they'll spend a high draft pick and hopefully find a good player there. I do think his ceiling is a little bit capped. I don't know that I could truly see him as like this elite wide receiver 1, but I could see him as a solid wide receiver 2.
That's how I saw him originally. Was this guy that could get to a wide receiver 1 and be an upper echelon, but I don't see that anymore. So I do see the cap that you see there as a wide receiver 2.
And that's okay. It's okay to buy good wide receiver 2s. Like you need those to win. Like not any team's having 3 wide receiver 1s on the roster, and most likely if you do, you're missing elsewhere on that.
And especially if you're getting at a low wide receiver 3 price tag. And that's the key to it.
That's the whole point of the show. Is like, where's the value? It's not like we're not searching for these best players. We're just finding for good value to help your dynasty team. If you go back and look at all these players we've talked about, whether it be the running backs, receivers, tight ends, you'll see that, again, that's what we're looking for. We're not trying to give you the guys that everybody's telling you to go buy and sell. It's like we're trying to find legit value in the dynasty leagues today.
All right, I'm going to go to the next receiver here on the board, and I'm going to go with Mr. Wide receiver by himself, Robert Woods. Robert Woods every year presents a value. once again, and I thought for sure, like, he's not going to present a value this year because he's been too good of a value every single year. But yet here we are again. He's a wide receiver 33 on the board right now.
That's ridiculous, man. Come on.
It's ridiculous because guess what he's done the past 3 seasons? He's been wide receiver 14, 14, and 11 the past 3 seasons. 14, 14, and 11. He's been consistently good. And his biggest issue, specifically this past season, was, I talked about Juju Smith-Schuster's ADOT. His ADOT was pretty gross as well. Him and Kupp both were in the bottom 10 with their ADOT. The thing is,
not so fast.
It has less to do with them and has a lot. If it's 2 players, their 2 main receivers are that low, has less to do with them and more to do with their quarterback. Their quarterback was Jared Goff. His air yards last season, 3,406th. That was 21st in the NFL. Matthew Stafford's air yards, by the way, with not a good receiving core. Matthew Stafford's air yards, 4,609, which was 7th in the NFL. Over 1,000 yards, 1,200 to be exact, 1,200 yards difference in how far he was throwing the ball downfield over the course of the season. He is going to look to get deep. And right now, they don't really have much of a deep threat that's established. Maybe Tutu Atwell could be that guy. They drafted him. But chances are he's going to have to wait because we have Robert Woods, we have Cooper Kupp, and we have Van Jefferson, who they brought into the fold last year with Tyler Higbee at tight end. If there's a guy with enough wheels and enough speed to get downfield and make some downfield plays, it's Robert Woods.
Wait. What about Deshaun Jackson, man?
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
Too
the
bad
first
he's
week, he will have a great ADOT. But I think Robert Woods is the guy in this offense that could make more downfield plays. I think he was just operating close to the line of scrimmage out of necessity. Now, even if he only does that again, he's getting a better quarterback throwing him the ball. So I think a repeat at wide receiver 14 again is not out of the realm of possibility. So him being drafted as wide receiver 33 once again presents a great value for Robert Woods.
It's redundant at this point. We talk about Robert Woods literally.
It's silly, but we have to.
Year. For 3 years, we've been talking about Robert Woods' buy because he
Keep
always
buying him.
holds value. And I have a lot of Robert Woods shares too because I've
Yep.
always bought Robert Woods. And I think wide receiver 14 is his floor because I think he actually, we talked about this when the trade went down. The number one player that benefits from this is Robert Woods over Cooper Kupp there in this offense. And I think Robert Woods is, if he stays healthy, has a very good chance to be a wide receiver 1. If Matt Stafford's to take a big step up this year and enter that MVP kind of category some people are talking about, it's going to be because of Robert Woods catching those footballs. A 1,400-yard receiving season with 9 touchdowns is not out of the realm for a guy like Robert Woods this year. I actually think that he's in a very good position at his best fantasy year yet to date for Robert Woods. I think he's a great championship caliber buy. I think even if it's just for 2 more years, I don't care. I'm fine with that. I'm giving up a first easily for Robert Woods, and I would probably throw onto it. Like I'd probably come at the owner right away. Hey, I'll give you my first and third for Robert Woods, and see where that gets me, because this is a player that will make a difference week in and week out. Because what's good about Robert Woods too is not only does he always finish as a high end, like low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2, is he does that very consistently. He's one of the most consistent fantasy football wide receivers out there today, that week in, week out, he's giving you double-digit points. And over the last couple of years, Jared Goff has unfortunately hurt Robert Woods somewhat. That's the kind of quarterback he is. He's not the high-level producing fantasy football quarterback, but he's been able to do so with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. Now you throw Matt Stafford in here, and they're going to open his playbook, because it came out, a lot of reports came out that Sean McVay had to limit his playbook due to Jared Goff being his quarterback, and he couldn't execute the plays he wanted to execute. And that's why he was so frustrated. If you read that long article about the divorce of the two, that's mentioned a lot. Like he was super frustrated that Jared Goff couldn't run the plays that he wanted to play because he couldn't get it done. That's all going to change with Matt Stafford. And they gave up a lot for Matt Stafford. So they're going to be, this is a long-term marriage, right? And that's why, and you mentioned his name, Van Jefferson, too. I was very close to put in Van Jefferson in this category as a buy, and I do think Van Jefferson is a great buy, who you don't have to pay much for whatsoever. But again, that doesn't pay dividends until I believe until 2022. But I do think Van Jefferson, along with Robert Woods, are a great buy. Van Jefferson for the future, but if you want to win right now, as always, there's not a better player to go do for the production compared to the price you're going to pay than Robert Woods. Any other receiver that's going to give you the Robert Woods production, you're paying twice as much for in that category. Twice as much easily. One of the best values that we've been literally saying on this podcast for years. Robert Woods is one of the, we were talking, it used to be Jarvis Landry and Robert Woods.
Yeah.
Jarvis fell off. Now it's just Robert Woods we're talking about right now. But Robert Woods has stand pat over the last 3 years. Going to year 4, we're telling you, Robert Woods, one of the best values in Dynasty Fantasy Football.
And I think part of it is that he is slightly older. Like he's 29 years old, but we're talking very similar range to Nuke and Devontae Adams and Michael Thomas and like all of these other guys that we were talking about. Like they still have another 2-3 good years left in him. He does as well. And he just signed a new contract recently that technically he is signed through 2025. His contract goes through. So his age 33 season. Now, there are some years that they could potentially get out from his contract in there. But, I mean, we could be looking at all the way through 2025 where Robert Woods is playing football for this team. And if he's still producing like he is, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be.
All right. Yeah, I love it too. I mean, obviously, I was looking, trying to pull up some stats here. And I looked at air yards per reception and literally scrolling.
He's in the bottom 10.
Scrolling 81st in the league last year. We had 10.3 yards, air yards per reception.
Yeah, if you do it based on like 30 or more catches, he's in the bottom 10, as well as Cooper Kupp. Like,
it is nuts.
Jared Goff just crushed their value, and they still produced.
Right.
We don't have the information here in front of you, and I encourage everybody here listening or watching. I wonder what the odds of somebody finishes wide receiver 14 overall in PPR leagues while finishing that high, while finishing that low in ADOT. You know
it would be interesting to see.
That says a lot. Like, how does a player finish so low out of 100 players, so low at the bottom 10, but finishes a top 14 fantasy football receiver? I mean, that says a lot by itself.
Points per reception, you know what I mean? Like you're getting a ton of receptions. They're short yarded stuff, and then you're gonna have to do some stuff with it afterwards.
You would have to get a stupid amount of targets, which the only ones that would even have enough targets to even do it or made plays, in which Robert Woods made plays. The only other person that's in that category is Juju, but his was more on just a ridiculous amount of targets. Robert Woods he got targeted a decent amount, sure, but he made big plays from those targets.
Absolutely.
Again, very, very consistent. We're talking about a guy that had 129 targets. So he did that. So you mentioned Pepper with targets. He had 129. His hands are so good and so sure he caught 90 of the 129 targets out there. So it wasn't like his targets were like 129 for a wide receiver 1. That's nothing crazy to write home about. So it's
a lot of other guys are at 140s, 150s.
But it goes back to my point of a guy who was finished a wide receiver 14 to be top 10, bottom 10 at ADOT, but still finished there. It didn't have like 160, like the Michael Thomas year, right?
He had what, 170 that year,
172, something like targets, something like that. So that to me, that's even just, it just shows you the caliber of player that Robert Woods is.
Yep. All right. So we got to get back to our friends at PredictionStrike.com. We've been talking about PredictionStrike.com for a while, and Robert Woods is a player that I would absolutely. Jared, can you check the price as to what Robert Woods is on PredictionStrike.com?
Yeah, but everybody hates him so much. You probably gotta make him work.
Price check on Robert Woods. While he's doing that, let me tell you guys about Prediction Strike. They are the only performance-based site where you can buy and sell shares of players just like the stock market. The nice part is some of us, sure, we have a lot of stock market knowledge or cryptocurrency knowledge or whatever. But if you're listening to the show, you probably have football knowledge, fantasy football knowledge. You got those numbers for me, Jared?
Yeah, $6.94.
All right. So I don't really have much to compare that to, but I'm sure that's a good price overall for Robert Woods at PredictionStrike.com. But it's the only place that you can do this. And the beautiful part is they have the app, so you can do it all from your phone. It functions great. If you want to go to the website, cool, go to the website. But if you do that, do us a favor, put in the promo code Dynasty. That's going to get you $10 free with any deposit of $20 or more. That's promo code Dynasty. First deposit of $10 or more, you'll get $10 with your first deposit of $20 or more.
Yeah, free money. Get in those shares.
Straight cash, homie.
Just looking across this board, I mean, DJ Chark, he's $3.69. Odell's $2.
So they actually have Robert Woods priced about right.
Yeah, Denzel Mims $1.50. Justin Jefferson's $8.50.
What about
Brian Edwards is 70 cents.
What about Keenan Allen?
Brian
Because that guy's right on top of Robert Woods last year as far as standings. Keenan Allen,
Keenan Allen?
similar
Let
age
me look him up.
as well.
Brian Edwards is 70 cents.
You get that $10, just throw it all on Brian Edwards for 70 cents. You get,
Yeah, all 10 free dollars on Brian. Because I'm going to talk about him next.
Yeah, I love Brian Edwards.
Oh, me too.
Did you see that picture of him?
Keenan Allen's
Yeah,
$3.53.
There you
Keenan
go.
Allen.
That's a nice little value.
That's a
right
good
Robert
value.
Woods-
All right, so Robert Woods is very accurately priced and maybe slightly overpriced. All right, never mind.
I know, but you use that knowledge though. It still goes.
Exactly,
It's still
yeah.
using knowledge. Okay, he's priced accordingly. So where is the value?
Yep.
Then you see Brian Edwards worth 70 cents. You're like, okay, that's the value.
That's the value.
So, all right, now when you go to auction, right? Same. Where's the value at an auction? Now, what is auction? Auction fantasy football is when you go.
No,
with your league mates,
That's
pretty much
auction,
just
right?
like that. Yeah, yeah. Then you end up with a cow.
Dude, I thought Garrett was having a breakdown or something. I was like, what's going on?
This girl's done lost her mind.
He's having
So-
a fit.
When you're doing an auction, you get a group of league in there and you bid on a player. So you start off with $1,000 salary budget, for example. You put on Justin Jefferson on the block. Okay, I nominate Justin Jefferson. I'll bid $1. I'll bid 20. I'll bid 30. I'll bid 31. And then the highest price goes. And then you
And the
nominate
highest
a new
price
player.
was Matt O'Hara.
Yeah, $85 on a $100 budget.
Who needs the rest of a team when you got Justin?
RealitySportsOnline.com gives you the best opportunity to play auction fantasy football and dynasty fantasy football right now because they offer everything you could possibly would think of as an NFL GM because it's kind of like being an NFL GM. It's going to give you a more realistic way to play dynasty because you're actually dealing with salaries and contracts. So you might only have a player for 3 years, 4 years, 2 years, a 1-year contract. So not only are you managing your roster long term, you're also managing contracts and the money that you're spending. All this might sound complicated, but RealitySportsOnline.com makes it as simple as possible when it comes to running an auction league. They're the #1 site in the world for that, and it offers you one of the most realistic ways to be an NFL GM. And if you're not really sure about this, go ahead, jump in there. They have an amazing mock draft tool where you do a free mock agency auction draft. So you can get ready. That way you can prepare yourself and get ready and look at values. And that way you're not going to waste money or your time early on in the process. If you'd like to see what everybody's talking about and use the #1 platform out there for auction, use the promo code NERDS and you get 10% off either your team or your league today. That is big time savings when you get entire league 10% off. And you can do that using that promo code NERDS today. Fantasy just got real at RealitySportsOnline.com. Now we mentioned Brian Edwards.
Yeah, we did.
And a guy who, we talked about our sophomore step up. This is a guy that we easily could have talked about in Brian Edwards and why we like him. Now, Brian Edwards came out last year and was a dud muffin, right? 11 catches, 193 yards, and a touchdown.
Dud muffin.
This is somebody.
I've never heard that before. That was good.
Yeah, just made up on the spot. You're welcome. 6'3",
didn't say
215 pounds. Well, I said you're welcome anyways. You're a dud muffin too. And he's somebody that's going to come in here now that we lose Nelson Aguilar, who vacates 82 targets by himself. Aguilar went out there, had a very okay wide receiver 3 year. And like Garrett said earlier, he's jacked up, ready to go, locked in as an ex-receiver. And to me, Edwards seems even safer than a guy like Henry Ruggs when it comes to a PPR kind of league. This is a guy who I envision being peppered with targets in this offense. And somebody who I saw, we go back to all the reasons why we loved him coming out of South Carolina. This is a guy who broke out at the age of 17. He was playing well in the SEC at the age of 17. And he leaves South Carolina as the all-time leader in receptions and receiving yards. This is a guy who averaged 17.5 receptions in limited playing snaps, or 17.5 receiving yards per reception in his limited playing time. And this guy who never played over 40% of the snaps, he just didn't play a lot last year. It was Henry Ruggs, it was Nelson Aguilar,
He got banged up at
Darren
some point,
Waller,
too.
he was banged up. They went out and they didn't really change this receiving core too much now. They know they have these two young guys and they got to see what they have in them in their first round pick in Henry Ruggs and Brian Edwards. And this is a guy we've loved and talked about now for over a year and a half now. And I think sometimes it shows you got to be a little bit of patient. You got to have a little bit of patience. I went out and bought a lot of Brian Edwards shares last year. I encourage everybody still to this time, go out and buy Brian Edwards. It's going to be a little bit harder because a lot of people are tweeting out pictures of how he looks. He's the most muscular receiver on there. And if you watch Dynasty, if you're on Dynasty Twitter, you see there has been a lot of Bryan Edwards hype lately. But this is one of those rare instances where there's still a lot of hype about a player that I'm still buying because that price tag still hasn't reached the hype yet.
Yeah, I mean, right now he's going off the board as wide receiver 77. So it's definitely the hype hasn't caught up to, I guess, Twitter's hype.
Sleepers ADP?
Yeah, Sleepers ADP hasn't caught up to Twitter yet. But, I loved him coming out of South Carolina, like you were saying. He's a physically imposing guy. I think he does well, catching balls away from his body. The thing is, I saw a slow start coming for him and both Henry Ruggs. The offense there with John Gruden is very difficult to pick up on. And it takes people 1, 2, maybe even 3 years. Now they're getting kind of thrust into the scene a little bit now that you said Nelson Aguilar is gone. These guys are both going to be kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit here in year 2 to see, I think, if they can sink or swim in this offense. And we will see. I think, out of the two, Bryan Edwards, I do feel like he's more equipped to make this kind of jump because I think he fills that void very nicely that Aguilar kind of leaves behind. So I guess we'll see exactly how this offense evolves, but I love him at especially at this ADP at wide receiver 77. I like him. I would have liked him, you told me
20 spots.
I was going to say, you told me he was wide receiver 45. I would say I love him there as well. So I do really like where he's at now as far as value. I love it. Go out.
You're talking about cutting ADP in half and liking the value,
yeah, exactly.
which is tremendous.
Jared, we were talking on the way up here, and I want you put out a tweet recently about Bryan Edwards, and some people were giving you a hard time about it, and I thought it was very good value. Tell everybody what your tweet was.
I just said to go out there and throw a 2022 second at Bryan Edwards.
Love it.
That's not even this year. That's next year.
I'm saying I would start at a third, but I think a second will get it done.
I don't think a third will get done at all.
I don't think so either.
I wouldn't even insult.
That's why I didn't say that.
I wouldn't even insult the owner by offering a third because he's just not going to take it.
But so I thought that was kind of obvious. The funny thing is, what were a lot of the responses you got?
Some of them were like the opposite. Like, now I'm going to look for a 2022 second for my Bryan Edwards. I was like, all right, man. See, that's why. I think that's a fair trade.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that gave him grief over that, and I was like, not even this year's, next year's,
which is crazy.
Second,
which is crazy,
especially if you're a contender and it's a late second.
And I don't think a lot of common dynasty owners have the foresight like we are trying to provide to you guys that the 2022 class in the second round is probably not.
It doesn't look great right now.
It doesn't look great.
I don't even care if it looked okay. I would give him a 20. I don't care if it was a 2020. This class here, it was a mid-second. I'd give that up for Bryan Edwards. In a super flex league, I would give that up for Bryan Edwards. Yep. I mean, you're talking about that Rondale Moore range, right around there. Like, I'm okay.
That's probably an early second. I would still probably do it.
And I'm okay with I would take Bryan Edwards over Rondale Moore right now. Me personally.
I'm pretty. If I'm not there, I'm pretty darn close.
I'm not saying
sign me up.
Yeah, I'm not saying
I love Bryan Edwards.
I think.
Yep.
I would rather take the X receiver than the smaller receiver.
I would too.
Gain on speed. That's what Bryan Edwards brings.
And let's not forget last year, his own quarterback. Now, granted, they have to be their best hype men, but he was saying he reminded him of playing with Davante Adams when they played together at Fresno State. He was wide receiver 1 last year. Will he end up as Davante Adams? Probably not. But even if he's just 75% of Davante Adams, you're getting a great receiver.
And he has the potential to grow into that Davante Adams.
It took Davante Adams a while to do that himself.
It took 3 years to turn into Davante. Davante Adams was a slow burn as well. Out of all that class, out of all those receivers, obviously Sammy Watkins didn't pan out at all. Obviously, guys like
Odell,
Dorial Green Beckham,
Allen Robinson,
Dorial Green didn't pan out. But the guys that even turned out to be good, he was the slowest processing out of all those guys. Because I had to do a big show on Davante Adams a year after. This is the guy you want to buy now. And then he blew up. And that was years ago.
First 2 years. First season, 446 yards, 3 touchdowns. Second year, 483 and only 1 touchdown. It wasn't until his third season where he got almost 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. That's when you really finally saw it in year 3 from Davante Adams.
And that's where, after year 2, it's this is time to buy Davante Adams, and it worked out. It's one of those times we were able to hit. So, I think Bryan Edwards falls in that category of a great buy. Year 2, coming off a year where he didn't do anything whatsoever, that creates a buy-in window. I have no problem, definitely after last year, of a guy not producing and being able to buy that player. Matt, let's get your second guy.
All right, so my second guy is I guess, oft-injured player, but we're hoping that he kind of turns this around in year 3. My guy is Deebo Samuels, 25 years old. Right now he's coming off as wide receiver 37, according to the Sleeper ADP. And, obviously, it's warranted. Unfortunately, he's been injured. He's only played 16 games in the 2 seasons. If you look at across the board, his career numbers, 16 games, 125 targets, 90 receptions, almost 1,200 yards, 4 touchdowns. So I guess my whole point with him is if he gets back to the point where he's healthy, because he's had kind of ticky-tacky injuries. It hasn't, he broke his foot before the season started in 2020. That was in the offseason in like June. So he got off to a bad start there, missed 3 games. And then played a few games, and then he suffered a hamstring injury, missed 3 games, played another few games, and then had another span where he missed 3 games last year with another kind of strain. So if we can just get him kind of fully healthy, get him, in a normal off season where he's maybe not training on his own and he didn't break his foot, and he can actually play a full season, the numbers extrapolate pretty well to a guy that's going to be in the mid-range of a wide receiver 2, and to be having this value right now of a wide receiver 37. I mean, I understand why, because the injuries have been there and kind of been nagging this player for his first 2 seasons in the league. But if he gets that cleaned up, it offers tremendous value in a high-powered offense. Obviously, the quarterback situation's a little bit in flux. We're not exactly sure what, who's going to be under center the whole year. But I think regardless of who's under center, these guys, it's going to be Brandon Ayuk, it's going to be Deebo Samuel. Those are going to be the 2 top targets at the wide receiver position. And there's plenty of room, I think, for both of those guys to operate in this range of wide receiver 2, middle range wide receiver 2.
Do you think that with George Kittle, though? That's the question that I struggle with.
I do.
So you think George Kittle could be a top 3 tight end, and both of those guys could be wide receiver 2?
I know that that's like your argument that you don't think that can happen.
I don't.
But which running back is going to be like catching a bunch of, you know what I mean? Now we're down, like the running back position is, I think, kind of shunted to the side where they're going to be getting some targets, but I don't think they're going to be a major part of the passing game. So it's going to be a 3-headed monster between those 3 guys, because what do Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuels catch the ball close to the line of scrimmage and do things with the ball in their hands? So I think it lessens the need to get a running back involved in the passing game, and I think it gets the ball out of the quarterback's hand quickly, and that's exactly what Kyle Shanahan wants to do. I
think what throws off when you want to throw George Kittle in there is like sometimes we overthink the yards. Like for George Kittle to finish the high end, you're talking about like 900 to 1,100 yards usually for a tight end. So if you're throwing for 3,500 yards, that still leaves 2,500 yards amongst your wide receivers and running backs to catch. And I'm with you. I think what Deebo brings is his upside is his high target, his high reception ability, his play after the catch. He's so dynamic with the ball in his hands. I mean, even as a rookie, he had 81 targets as a rookie, and he caught 57 of those and produced 802 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also had 14 carries for 159 yards and 3 touchdowns as a rookie. All things that I absolutely loved. I was a big Deebo fan, and he gets hurt last year. Right. And I think Shanahan does have a plan. I know he loves Brandon Ayuk too as well, but I agree with Matt. I think there's room for those guys to both produce. They're not guys that you would envision to be wide receiver 1s, but mid-range wide receiver 2s. And mid-range, you're talking about wide receiver 16, 17, 18, 19, right around there, which is what his ADP is showing
37
isn't there. Because this is a guy that they like to use in a run game and just get the ball in his hands, because he turns into a running back with the ball in his hands. He's a fantastic fantasy football wide receiver in that range. And I don't think it's hard to find, and we find good teams that produce 2 wide receiver 1s, right? 2 wide receiver 1s.
Sure.
So for Kittle to get his, I think he could be the number 1 option. I do envision a scenario where Ayuk and Deebo Samuel can both be wide receiver 2s. I don't think in a Kyle Shanahan offense, that would not surprise me whatsoever.
The problem that I see with it, and it's not that I don't like Deebo as a player. I was really high on him coming out. But there's a few things. Like, one, almost every year in college and so far every year in the pros, he's been banged up. So, like, we haven't gotten to see him be healthy yet. On top of that, we know that they are going to run the ball a good amount. This isn't Atlanta. This isn't, the Chargers. This isn't Kansas City. Like, they're going to have a very healthy dose of the run game. And on top of that, as much as I like Trey Lance, we haven't seen Trey Lance yet. So, like, there's just a lot of question marks. And then it would have to be a perfect scenario where they're basically the only three getting targets and nobody else is getting any at all. And all of, like, it just seems the probability of all three of those things happening, while possible, just seems highly unlikely to me.
They had 570 pass attempts last year. So that's a lot of targets to go around.
But what was that overall in the league? That was,
I don't know.
Like,
I don't have that. I don't have that.
15th, because I know, like, a lot of the top teams were in, like, the closer to 650.
Sure, but I mean, I don't necessarily care where it lands as far as within the league. But 570 attempts, I mean, 120, that's 240. That still leaves 330 pass attempts, and that's, if you give Brandon Ayuk 120, if you give George Kittle 130, let's say, targets.
But
there's still
let's look at
the
let's look at the closest possible comparison to that, which would be the Kansas City Chiefs, because they have a strong tight end in Travis Kelce, and they have Tyreek Hill, who puts up monster numbers. But they don't even have a third guy that's,
But they're getting the running backs involved more.
They are.
So and that's where I think
you can make a team that does get their running backs involved. Minnesota, right? Minnesota had Dalvin Cook, top 3 running back. He had 2 wide receiver ones. Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen.
But their tight end wasn't doing anything.
Okay. But that's what I'm saying. The running backs probably aren't going to be as involved.
The running back,
but
the running back offsets that. You have a team that didn't do as much in Seattle, right? DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, both finished the year as wide receiver ones. You can say a team that gets in.
But they didn't have a tight end. Like, that's the thing. You got to get all 3. Like, could it happen? Sure, but like the probability just seems.
But these
really
are wide receiver ones
unlikely.
we're talking about. I mean, if you want to slow it down and bring them back just a little bit, I mean, you could look at a team like Carolina, right? Carolina didn't have a good quarterback situation. They had 3 wide receivers that throughout the year all produced at a high level: Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, and DJ Moore. So they produced at a high level.
And I think that's your best, and I think I was the one that talked about that stat last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. So I think that's your hope, is that something like that could happen. But even there, they were, it was like wide receiver 24 and 25 were 2 of those 3 guys.
Yeah, it was 24. So I get it. I think you're thinking more high level where Matt's producing, where the ADP is like around 36, where you're getting, instead of a low end wide receiver 3, you're talking about a mid-range wide receiver 2. The very I think worst case, Matt, would be wide receiver like 25, which is high end wide receiver 2. So again, it just goes back to the
3 wide receiver 3.
Wide receiver 3. So the ADP just, what he's saying is ADP is
there's
off.
a gap.
I agree with you.
There's
100%.
a gap in the ADP,
sure,
in my opinion.
And I agree 100%, because when that guy is healthy, he's dynamic.
Yep.
Oh, he absolutely is. He's fantastic. It's not a knock against any of those players. I think all 3 of those players are fantastic. I think they've developed them well. It's just the injury bug and the overall opportunities. I just don't know that it can happen.
But I think what that can do is deplete the price tag. So good. I think he might be aware, because like, if you're like me, I'm not selling Debo for any discount.
Sure.
But all those things, like you're worried. There might be players out there that they've had enough of injuries. When you own a player and he's been hurt the whole time, he's not playing for you, it's way more easy to get frustrated if you don't love the player. Like, I love Debo, so I've sat through these injuries, but it's way easier in other scenarios like that.
Absolutely, and that's where the gap comes from, and that's what I think opens up opportunities to buy a player like this.
Okay, last guy. Let's get into it.
All right, last guy. So this is kind of a situation. I think Matt talked about earlier, where our initial thought of where the ADP was is different than what Sleeper actually has. So it's not as great of a buy as I originally thought it was. But I still want to present the player and talk about why I think the ADP is right, and I would still even be willing to go a spot or 2 higher than it is. And that's on Terry McLaurin. So originally I saw that his ADP was at wide receiver 14. And I was like, I'd have cut that in half. I would like to have him around 7, 8. Now, when I got the updated numbers and I saw what Sleeper had, they have him at wide receiver 10, which I think is much more reasonable for where you're going to have him. But here's why I think he can live his career around this spot. First of all, look at the quarterbacks that he has played with. It has been dumpster juice to the nth degree. I mean, we're talking about Dwayne Haskins. Tyler Heineke looked like, or Tyler, whatever it was.
Doesn't matter.
Alex
Honestly,
Smith.
it doesn't matter.
Like Case Keenum. Like, he's just had just junk overall at quarterback, and he has still found ways to produce. He has a very sustainable target share right now, or overall targets. He's at 8.9. That's something that I think he could consistently live right around that 8.5, 9 range of targets per game and be very, very productive. Really, the only thing missing from him being this upper echelon wide receiver last year was touchdowns. He had 7 and I think that's partly because of the offense. The offense was the 8th lowest scoring offense overall in the NFL last year. They did not put up good numbers. You insert Ryan Fitzpatrick into this, there are going to be a lot of turnovers, but there's going to be a lot of points. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for some big plays. And I think long-term, they're going to find something at quarterback for this team because that's all they're missing right now. They have a great offensive line. They have a good running back. They've added some weapons in Curtis Samuel and Diami Brown, guys that are going to help make plays, but it's going to take away from like what the Giants did in the last week of the season where they're just shifting their entire coverage to Terry McLaurin just in hopes to shut him out because that's what teams have done. We're going to try to take away Terry McLaurin. Hasn't truly worked because he still put up monster numbers, but we are just going to do everything to stop him. Now there's at least some other options in this offense to throw the football to. So all of that being said, he was wide receiver 21 in 2020, but he only had 4 touchdowns. If that number even goes back to his rookie season at 7, all of a sudden he's a borderline wide receiver 1 with, like I mentioned, Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith and all of these guys.
And that's something that's definitely obtainable with the change of quarterback as well.
Right, 7 is not a lot. You know, that's not. I'm not asking for 18 or 14 like Adam Thielen got, or I'm asking for 7. 7 touchdowns. He's going to be right in that wide receiver 1 range, and he can do that for a long period of time. We've seen it with the worst of the worst. If he dares get a good, competent quarterback at any point in his career, we could be seeing, you know, a top 6 type dynasty.
And he's not like a big guy, but he can separate and he can break people's ankles in short little areas. So it's not like he's not going to be an end zone type of threat. You know what I mean? Last year he had 6 end zone targets. He ended up with 4 touchdowns. You know what I mean? If we got that number up to the level of some of these other guys, you know,
20 targets in the end zone.
Adam Thielen, 20. Yep. You know what I mean? And he only, he had 14 touchdowns. That was the kind of freak year for Adam Thielen. But Tyler Lockett 14, DeAndre Hopkins 10, DK Metcalf 14. So these are like higher end guys. Like that's what you expect. You expect to get your best wide receiver the ball in the end zone. So to only get him 6 end zone targets is pretty criminal. He did have a 98.1% snap share. So that is crazy. It was the highest in the league. And I would expect that to continue as well because he's just such a solid player and he's there down in, down out. So I would expect, a very similar snap share going forward because there's no reason to take the guy off the field. He's amazing. You can put him anywhere on the field and he'll win. So Terry McLaurin, love the guy. And at this point, his ADP is raised up, but it could continue to go higher and higher. Yeah. This is an ascending player. So this might be the time to buy now before he becomes one of these unobtainable guys.
Right. And so, and I do want to clarify, like I was buying like crazy when I thought it was 14.
Sure.
At 10, I think that's about right.
It is about right, but he might be unobtainable.
Right. He could enter that DK Metcalf, AJ Brown tier.
And that's the thing. I think he's valued like even at 10. Again, I love Terry McLaurin. Right. This is somebody who we like coming out. Mm-hmm. We gave a very good grade. We had him in our first round forever there in our rookie pre-draft process. It's the only thing I'm worried about is like. I like him a lot, but right around 10, it's like he's being valued. It's like that like wide receiver 1. People are like, wide receiver 1, book it. We don't know their long-term situation at quarterback. We don't. I mean, I like Ryan Fitzpatrick this year too as well. They signed Curtis Samuel to a long-term contract, and I love Curtis Samuel a lot as well. So Curtis Samuel is going to eat into Terry McLaurin a little bit as well. And when you look at the market, there's some guys ahead of him that I don't love, but, I mean, there's a lot of young guys out here, right? Like, I like Calvin Ridley more, Justin Jefferson, DK Metcalf. Al Robinson's still young enough. Mike Evans is still hanging around. A.J. Brown.
I would take him over Mike Evans.
most people would, and that's fair. I would take him ahead of Mike Evans too, dynasty-wise, but I'm talking about for a while, they're going to be in that same category. And then guys like we mentioned like earlier, like CeeDee Lamb. I think Cortland Sutton's coming back. Jerry Jeudy's going to come back out there. Jamar Chase.
Jamar Chase is right a couple spots below him.
Jamar Chase is coming out here as well. So there's a lot of guys out there where I think Terry McLaurin, who's an absolutely fantastic receiver, I think he lives in that Robert Woods range for most of his career. So him being wide receiver 10 is right spot on, right around for me. I'm with you. But if he has a 24 value dip, then I'm buying. The only problem is I think the community does value him right around. Like Terry McLaurin's like a hot name. So even though he's a buy, if you can get him, yes. I think out of all the guys we talked about this whole from quarterback to now, he's the guy that we talked about that will be the hardest for you to go out actually and try to acquire because
I think so too. Yeah.
You cannot overpay for that value because then you're losing. You know what I mean? Like you're losing at the point. Because even 10, honestly, even at 10, that's if you're paying 10 value overall, that's risky. Because that's where I expect him to live. You know what I mean?
Like, he's coming off the board 33 overall in 1 QB leagues right now.
And that's right.
So,
you know what I mean? So it's just right where he needs it. I love the
third
player.
round. Yeah, and once again, I originally thought this was 14, so I was going to buy that extra round up.
You just got to update ADP just now. So you realize the ADP you were looking at is not old too. So the ADP you're looking at was in that long ago was at 20. So maybe it is possible. And then definitely add these new names to it. But again, to me, Terry McLaurin on all the names mentioned, like, well, good luck. I mean, like he falls in that hot young name that everybody takes a step forward with. Which I'm actually somewhat like. I love Curtis Samuel so much. Like I think he hurts Terry McLaurin a little bit. I really do.
The funny thing
Samuel
is,
takes a big step forward.
I told Jared I almost picked Curtis Samuel and Terry McLaurin as my buys originally, and I was like, yeah, I probably shouldn't do that. But I do really like both of those players.
We couldn't do McLaurin, Campbell, and
too much of an Ohio State bias, you think?
Feeding right into that.
Wait till you guys get a load of Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. They're stud muffins. Dude, Garrett Wilson's the truth.
Garrett Wilson's so good.
Let's
talk about Michael Thomas now.
So that's it. That's a show that ends our bye episodes. We'll be back next week. Like I said, it's just going to be Garrett and I next week.
Yep.
Because Matt's going to be on vacation. We actually recorded these shows a little bit early as well. So we're a week ahead on these shows because Matt's going on vacation. We want to make sure to get a show in here. And I'm going on vacation the following week. So Garrett and I are going to get another show out a week early before I go out as well, even earlier. But in the meantime, it's summertime. They all got it. Get to dynastynerds.com. Check it out. Check out the YouTube channel. Hit that like button, subscribe button. We got way more content going on YouTube. Marvin does some great videos. Jordan Raines does some good videos. We got a lot of content out there on YouTube, on our Instagram, and of course, dynastynerds.com, where you have all the tools you need to dominate your Dynasty League. Dynasty GM, which is the best tool on the market, which we literally offer you to prove it, to use it for free for 3 days by going to dynastynerds.com, and you'll find out it's the best tool on the market today.
Hotness coming.
So coming in. It's the Dynasty summer, boys. Woo. So we're recording shows early. We got to get tan. Look at this. It's going to get darker.
It's getting hot in here.
Oh, boy.
Well, time to go. See you next week.
Adios.